What is happening, everybody? Saturday afternoon, which means it is time for Neil Orfield and I to break down week 4 of the NFL slate. As you guys come in, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We are sponsored today by DraftKings NFL Rainmakers. If you guys haven't checked out Rainmakers yet, really fun product. And the best way to get your foot in the door is by free. Start out your collection by claiming the free starters pack that's available by clicking on the link that we have below in the description box. You're going to get a quarterback of your choosing, and the rest of the lineup is going to be filled out with players that are going to make it so that you could build a lineup for this weekend slate. And once again, totally free, that starters pack. So take advantage of it if you guys have not already. And now, Neil and I are going to be breaking down the slate, going through all of our favorite tournament plays for the weekend and week 4 of the season. Neil, how did week 3 go for you? Do you remember?
Week 3 went horribly for me. It was, I've talked about it a few times, probably my worst weekend ever in terms of combination of play and analysis. Like I felt like the only things that I got right were like the players that were 20+% owned. Anybody that I tried to get contrarian with went horribly wrong. Justin Fields being the poster boy for that for me in week 3. I was all over Justin Fields against the Chiefs, and he was just awful. Of course, he did get knocked out like at the 3-yard line. Maybe would have scored another rushing touchdown, but at the end of the day, he just wasn't very good against the Chiefs. But, you know, I feel good about the process there. I feel like a lot of sharp people that I know were also on the Justin Fields play last week. So at the end of the day, I think it was just it was a slate where the chalk won. Like people who had, you know, lineups that were everybody was 10+% owned. Those were lineups that were killing it. So what are you going to do? When the chalk wins, we're probably not going to do as well. How did you do?
Good. So I had 2 live lineups in the Millie Maker. My best one finished in 97th, and I think 97th is pretty.
Wow.
It was in the top 100. It was in the 90s though, so it wasn't like anything like crazy high, but it was still like it was in like 97th in the Millie Maker, and then it was like 30th or something like that in the $5 and some of the other contests. So that one lineup in itself paid for most of my entries for the weekend, but I've found it really useful also to just track a lot of my results in our NFL post-contest sim. I know a lot of people, when we do content, we talk about the pre-contest sim, we talk about the contest generator, but not as much about the post-contest generator, which has really helped me in terms of evaluating my lineups. And, you know, I'm not going to say help me in week 1 because there was no slate to look at before that. But sure. This is the most live lineups that I've had in the Millie Maker. Week 2, I didn't have any, but I had live lineups in week 1. I had lineups in week 3 that were live. So maybe one of these days I could join you, Neil, and win a Millie Maker. Because feels like it's coming.
Because you've had several, or at least a couple in the top 100, right? Out of like hundreds of thousands. So that's like, what can you can't really play any better. Like it's not like you can do anything to push it a few points higher to get first place. So yeah, getting close. Hopefully one of these days we can be the Millie Maker duo.
Yeah, one of these days, but still fighting for it. But last week was a solid one. Week 1 was still my best week of the season, but week 2 was my worst, and then week 3 was also somewhere in between. It was profitable, but not quite as good as what week 1 was. So now we're going to break down week 4, where hopefully this will be the weekend that one of us will end up winning $1 million. Neil, of course, himself has already won a Millie Maker in 2021, correct?
Correct.
All right, so we'll try to add one to the 2023 for Neil. Maybe it's something like every other year he wins a Millie Maker.
I wouldn't mind that. I'd take that, I think.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a bad career path at all. As you guys come in, like I said, just do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Where we're going to start here, Neil, is by talking about the quarterbacks. And I'm going to preface it with this. My quarterback is way different in terms of the field, the players that I'm getting to this weekend compared to the last few weeks, where the first few weeks of the season, a lot of my lineups were paying up at quarterback. And based on the lineups that I built so far this week, that is not going to be the case. There's still some stuff to change where, you know, we've got like Jimmy G, for instance. He's questionable to play. He's somebody I'm getting a good amount of exposure to. And then also we've got Deebo Samuel. He's questionable to play. That could impact what kind of Brock Purdy exposure I get to. But in general, Neil, are there any pay-up options that are really standing out to you at QB this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on where you draw the line, but obviously you just looking at our tools, Justin Herbert stands out as one of the top plays on the slate. And we have, what is the price tag on Herbert? Let me sort by salary here. I assume Justin Herbert's going to be pretty expensive. Yeah, he's 7,800. He's standing out in the top stack. So we have the Chargers coming in, Herbert around 7% ownership. The Chargers with a 16% chance of being the top stack stand atop the rest. So Justin Herbert by far looks like the best pay up option to me. Obviously, Josh Allen in that matchup with Miami, where there could be just incredible fireworks, is going to look pretty good as well. We have him slightly over owned, but I still think I'm going to be playing some Josh Allen. Clearly, that matchup could go off for like 100 points, and you're going to need all parts of that game. And Josh Allen has the better matchup, also has the rushing upside. So looks really good in that spot. So yeah, I'd say those two really stand out to me. Obviously, you can always play Hurts, but he's not in a great matchup, doesn't stand out from that standpoint. Don't really want to play Lamar Jackson when Baltimore has an implied team total that's 18.75 right now. Probably not going to go to Lamar. I guess Tua is up, like his price tag is up to 7,400, and we see some massive positive leverage on Tua. That obviously same matchup as Josh Allen. We've got Tua coming in at sub 4% owned with an 8% chance of being the top stack there in Miami. I think like you kind of have to bet on that game, or you don't have to. I think a lot of people will be betting on that game, and I think it makes a lot of sense to play a lot of parts of that Miami Buffalo game because those offenses are just like the top tier, the top of the top tier, those two. So I'd say those are the high end guys that really stand out to me. Is that kind of how you see it as well? Any differences for you?
I'm not really getting to the high end guys. The biggest issue that I have this weekend is twofold. Number one, there's a lot of cheaper quarterbacks that project well for us. And this is a slate where I really, really feel strongly that I want to pay up for wide receivers. Yeah. And when I look at some of the lineups that I've built, and I've gone through building lineups in the contest generator and the Sims tool for both DraftKings and FanDuel, and there are some differences at quarterback for me across the two different sites. But in general, I just don't have very much of the pay up quarterback. So on DraftKings, the most rostered expensive quarterback I have is 6% of Josh Allen, which is underweight to the field on him. Over on FanDuel, I have 9% of Josh Allen as my most rostered pay up option, and that is underweight to the field on him on both sites. Like I said, the main issue for me is that I really want to spend up for the wide receivers. The top wide receivers are very expensive today, or I should say this weekend. And here's the difference between the high-end quarterbacks and the low-end quarterbacks compared to the high-end wide receivers and the lower-end wide receivers. If you look at quarterback, our highest projected quarterback this weekend, Neil, is Josh Allen, which I have no issue with. I think that totally makes sense. Project for 23.76 fantasy points. I look at some of the cheap-end quarterbacks I'm getting to, like Brock Purdy, for instance. Brock Purdy at $5,900, we have projected for 19.71 fantasy points. So we're looking at a little more than 3 fantasy point difference between Josh Allen and Brock Purdy in our projections. The difference between the high-end wide receivers and the low-end wide receivers is such a bigger gap than that in our projections compared to the top-end quarterbacks versus everybody else. Like, for instance, our most highly projected wide receiver this weekend is Keenan Allen at 7,900. He's projected for 25.14 fantasy points. If you want to get the same price difference between the top wide receiver and the top quarterback, so Josh Allen to Brock Purdy is a $2,300 price difference. And there is a little over 3 fantasy points that separates them. If you look at our wide receivers, the difference between Keenan Allen and a wide receiver who is $2,000 less expensive than him, the closest is Jacoby Myers, and that is an 8 fantasy point difference. So just because of the gap in projections, when I'm running everything through our data, I just don't get to very many of the high-end quarterbacks this weekend. It's not because they're not great fantasy players, they're not in good spots. It's just when I'm looking at the best overall projected lineups and how they sim out for me, I really want to be living like the cheaper mid-range of the quarterback to enable me to spend up at wide receiver. Does that line of thought process make sense to you, Neil? Or is it still a thing where you feel like you need to get a good amount of exposure to some of these high-end guys?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes sense to me. Like you need to make some kind of concessions. Like we're playing within a salary cap, and it does make sense because these quarterbacks are all in great spots. Well, their high end wide receivers are also in great spots in Diggs and Tyreek Hill and all the receivers attached to these quarterbacks. So yes, it does make some sense to me. I think I'm gonna force in some of these guys, just like Tua, for example. Like just looking at the top stack tool, it's hard for me not to want to force in some of Tua when he's coming in at sub 4% ownership. But yeah, it does make sense to me that you need to make some concessions. you're not giving up as much to make concessions at quarterback versus wide receiver. So the line of thinking does make some sense. I guess that comes down to, I haven't made my lineups yet, so maybe I should run some lineups and see what I would get to, because it sounds like you've already run your lineups and that's what the sims are giving you, and that does make some sense to me, that we're going to end up playing a lot of the cheaper guys, because we have some cheaper guys in good matchups too that are looking good in this spot too. So yeah, that definitely adds up.
And then one other thing too is, like, on paper, the Dolphins-Bills game is a terrific one to target. The problem is that salary cap, that pesky salary cap, because everybody involved in that game is insanely expensive. Josh Allen's expensive. Tua's expensive. Tyreek Hill's expensive. Stephon Diggs is expensive. So all of that make it, pretty prohibitive to make a game stack of it. Like, what would have to happen for a stack of that game to be optimal? Like, there would have to be a bunch of cheap running backs and wide receivers that go off on the slate. And then also, as far as the quarterbacks, like, you couldn't have a cheap quarterback that goes off in a big way as well. So pricing is going to prohibit me to getting to that game in a way that I thought I was going to when I first looked at the matchups this weekend. But the quarterbacks I personally am getting to, Neil, I have 4 quarterbacks on DraftKings that I have double-digit exposure to. They're all in the cheaper end. So I'll give you that hint.
All right.
Can you guess which 4 they might be?
Definitely Brock Purdy. You already said Brock Purdy, and it kind of stands out in that matchup with Arizona. Mm-hmm. Let's see, who else would it be at quarterback? Let me look at who's cheaper at quarterback. Russell Wilson.
It is not Russell Wilson.
Ooh, man, already coming up empty. All right, so it's Jimmy Garoppolo.
It is Jimmy Garoppolo, with the caveat, obviously, that he's in concussion protocol. But Jimmy G, I think, should be good to go.
I think he's expected to play at this point.
But we'll find out more later tonight, potentially tomorrow. If he's not in, obviously, it's going to impact all my Raiders exposure, because Jimmy Garoppolo would no longer be a quarterback that I get to if he's out, obviously. But then also, it would be a downgrade to 2 very prominent pass catchers from the Raiders who I really like a good amount. So guess the other 2, and then I'll talk a little bit more about Jimmy G.
Bryce Young?
No.
Oh man, I'm 2 for 4 now. That's not very good at all. And the 2 that I've said, I think you already told me said the names earlier in the show. Man, I'm
One of them is
Rams.
I mean, well, then it would be Matthew Stafford, because Anthony Richardson is not that cheap.
It is Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford is one of them. So we've got 3 of them so far. While you try to figure out your guess for the 4th one, I do have an answer that I want to give to somebody in the YouTube chat, where copy paste dates. It says, how do you decide which tourneys are plus EV to play in? And how do you do the same lineups for each tournament? So, I mean, how I enter the same lineup for each tournament is pretty easy. You just enter the same one. Like, I might be missing part of the question, but you just enter the same lineup in multiple tournaments. That's no problem. As for how I decide which tournaments are plus EV for me to play, I use our post-contest sim, and it's something that's been really helpful for me for both baseball and football to figure out which contests are the softest and which ones are the most positive EV for me to play long-term. Like, for instance, I've noticed the $9 on DraftKings is one of the sharpest tournaments that exists anywhere. Yeah. And I've been able to figure that out by looking up the post-contest sim, and I've noticed that if I enter the same lineups in the Millie Maker, in the $5 GPP on DK, that's 150 max, the same in the $9 150 max, if I enter the same lineups across all 3 of those, my expected ROI is considerably lower in the $9 than it is in the other 2 tournaments. And that just by looking at the results in our post-contest sim and seeing what my projected ROIs are in that lineup. So just by doing that and looking at some of that data, I'm able to figure out which contests are the sharpest, which ones are maybe some of the softest. Like, there's a tournament in baseball that was running a lot this year, the $5 knuckleball. And there's the $5 knuckleball. There's the $15 real life. I'm trying to remember what all the different tournament names are.
The names of the tournaments.
But, yeah. But either way, I started to find out that there were days where I would enter 150 lineups in the $3, 150 lineups in the $15, 150 lineups in the $5. And I could find out that I have a 30% expected ROI in the $3. And with the exact same lineups, I might have a negative 5% expected ROI in the $5, just because for whatever reason, that tends to be a much sharper field. So that's what I go about doing in order to find which contest I want to be playing.
Yeah, it's smart. Using the post-contest sims is a great way to do that. Obviously, not everybody has access to them at this point, but yeah, really, really sharp way to figure that out. All right, my final guess. I'm just going to give you one more guess, and then I'll let you just tell us if I get it wrong. Is it CJ Stroud?
It is Kenny Pickett.
Okay. Kenny Pickett.
I'll walk through these guys individually, different reasons why I'm getting to them. And when it comes to Garoppolo, great game to stack, that Chargers-Raiders game. A lot of skill position players look good from the Chargers, and Keenan Allen in particularly, also some of the cheaper wide receivers, because there's no Mike Williams in the game, there's no Austin Eckler. There's a lot of playing time, a lot of snaps, a lot of targets to go around in that Chargers offense. So that is a game that we're like getting to. And with that in mind, you're just getting a much more cost-effective quarterback in Jimmy Garoppolo than you're getting to Justin Herbert. There's so much value in that game on both sides that I really do like getting there. And also, if you stack Jimmy Garoppolo as receivers and Garoppolo has a big game, the targets are only going to two guys, Neil. They're going to Devontae Adams and they're going to Jacoby Myers.
Yeah.
Garoppolo basically doesn't throw the ball to anybody else. So to me, the path to success for Jimmy G as a quarterback play with his stacks is pretty simple. It's pretty simple. If he has a big game, Adams and or Jacoby Myers having a big game. So that makes him really simple for me to stack. So Jimmy G being one of them. Is he somebody that you like getting to as well this weekend?
Yeah, no, I like that quite. Sometimes I feel like we can overcomplicate it sometimes. Like last weekend, I feel like Justin Herbert with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams made so much sense. And like I didn't end up playing as much of that double stack as I probably should have. It was one of the highest implied totals on the slate. Clearly a little bit of a funnel to those two receivers in particular. And that's what won, like all of the tournaments had at least the wide receivers in that game. A lot of them also had the Herbert part of that stack. I think you could do the same thing here. Absolutely. With the Raiders. And it makes sense because to play Jimmy G in those stacks, particularly this week, even more so than Herbert last week, because he's so much cheaper. Like last week, you could play the two receivers and then it gets a little bit price prohibitive to throw Herbert in there as well. Whereas this week with Jimmy Garoppolo, like you don't have that concern. He's not that expensive. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense to do that double stack.
So Jimmy G, quarterback I'm getting a lot of. Brock Purdy, we need to see the status of Deebo Samuel. Very much up in the air whether Deebo's going to end up playing or not. But another guy in Brock Purdy who we kind of know who his targets are going to be. He's throwing the ball to Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, or George Kittle. So like those are my stack partners with him. And then also you just got the great match from against Arizona. One other aspect too that I think ends up getting me to a good amount of the 49ers passing game is Christian McCaffrey is very expensive this weekend. And I mentioned before where I like spending up my money. Not only is he expensive, but he's very popular. And where I like spending my money is at wide receiver this weekend. So there's a lot of leverage to be had by playing the 49ers passing game. And then if it's the touchdowns come through the air as opposed to on the ground on McCaffrey, you're gaining leverage on the field. So Brock Purdy, somebody I like from that perspective. Are you on the board with Brock Purdy? And then before I move on with my other quarterbacks I'm targeting here, are there any cheap QBs that you happen to like a good amount?
Yeah, I mean, Brock Purdy, I think definitely makes a lot of sense. I mean, Bryce Young against that Minnesota pass defense makes some sense to me. I might try it out. I know he hasn't been great so far, but can't ask for much better matchup than what Brock Purdy has here. Vikings 23rd in pass DVOA. Panthers have a 21 implied team total, which is fairly high for the Panthers. So I think that is a game that I want to target a little bit, and Bryce Young pretty inexpensive. So yeah, I would say Bryce Young stands out as somebody that I would consider from the cheap end in terms of salary. For the most part, I think I'm on the same guys as you. I don't think I'm really going to be targeting. I've seen both people talking about both Baker and Jameis Winston. I get it. I don't love the matchups there. So I don't know how much I'm going to go to those. And just because we have so many other great spots here. No, I think as far as cheap guys go, I think that you've kind of nailed all of the cheap guys that I guess CJ Stroud I would throw into that bucket as well. He's just been so good. His receivers have been so good. He's been so condensed to where he's throwing it that he's going to be in play any week until he gets up to like 6,500 plus. So I think CJ Stroud in play, but otherwise I think you've essentially nailed all of the cheap guys that I'm interested in.
And then Winston, you'd mentioned him. I have some exposure to Winston. The one thing that's really difficult about him, though, at least as of right now, is that Derek Carr, at least as of yesterday, said he wants to play on Sunday. So it seemed earlier in the week that Carr wasn't going to play. Now it seems like there's a better chance that Carr plays. So it's kind of hard to say from that standpoint. If Winston's out there, like as high variance you're going to get a quarterback, like not just from like a game basis, but from a throw to throw basis, where you'll see Winston make a play downfield. Just be like, oh my God, this guy's incredible. And then he'll throw like 2 pick sixes in a row or something like utterly absurd. So Jameis Winston, if he plays, like I don't want to invest too much in him, but I think he's a viable large field tournament play, but not somebody who's going to be like a core play for me or anything like that at quarterback. One other guy here that I have a good amount of that I also mentioned is Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett, here's his pass attempts through 3 games this year, Neil. 46, 30, and 28. He's throwing the ball a ton so far this year. And something else about this also is that there's no Deontay Johnson, and the Steelers wide receivers have not really been priced up for it. So you've got George Pickens at $5,400. You got Calvin Austin at $3,300. You got Pat Freiermuth at $3,400. If Pickett is going to keep averaging like 35 pass attempts per game or something like that in a good matchup against the Houston Texans, it just is not going to take very much for this team to go off as a stack relative to the pricing. Kenny Pickett is $5,100. And then I mentioned how cheap the wide receivers are. If Pickett scores like 20 and then Freiermuth catches a touchdown, maybe Calvin Austin, something like that, also scores a touchdown, any of these cheap guys that do anything, you've got a really good stack there just relative to price. We've had Deontay Johnson out for more than a week now, and it's like the DraftKings pricing algorithm never got caught up to it. The same goes for FanDuel, by the way. I'm getting to more of Pickens and the Steelers over on DraftKings and FanDuel, but this is a very, very cost-effective stack and a good matchup.
Yeah, and that's impactful in a slate like this where we have so many pay up options that are in great spots here. So yeah, it does make it it's not a button that I love clicking, the Kenny Pickett to Calvin Austin stack, not exactly one that I'm excited about, but it does make sense when you've got so many expensive players that you want to pay up for to then correlate the cheap players that you're trying to fit in your lineup. So a cheap stack makes a lot of sense on a slate where there are so many great pay up options. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, and that's really what a lot of my quarterback exposure look like. I mentioned Matt Stafford, another one, and kind of similar type stuff where it's like Nakua, he's priced up a little bit at this point, but still, based on his workload, I don't think it's quite enough. So of the quarterbacks I have north of 10% of, I have the least of Stafford. I'm like barely over 10%, but I wanted to include him in my group of core quarterback plays. And then, I've got other guys mixed in like 2-3%. I mentioned I have 6% of Josh Allen, but if I was playing like 3 lineups this weekend, and I think that's going to apply to a lot of the people who are watching, like I would be playing like a Jimmy Garoppolo lineup, a Kenny Pickett lineup, a Brock Purdy lineup. That's really where I like going, is with cheaper quarterbacks this weekend. And by the way, I see we got the super chat from Ace of Spade asking us about tiers. So we'll talk about that after we finish quarterbacks and get into the running backs. But anything else you see that stands out to you at QB, Neil?
Yeah, I feel like we got to I just want to mention Anthony Richardson because we don't know exactly what he is so far at this point, but scored the last game he played 2 rushing touchdowns in the first quarter, like clearly has that, like he might be just way too cheap for what he's going to be. Like Anthony Richardson could be just a great fantasy NFL quarterback who's going to just rush for a ton of yards and a lot of rushing touchdowns. So in a good matchup against the Rams. So somebody in chat mentioned Anthony Richardson and Josh Downs. Yeah, that would be one if we're trying to keep it cheap with our stacks. Certainly, Downs is a cheap receiver that you could throw into your Anthony Richardson stacks. I still wouldn't play him naked. I know we have this conversation all the time. Yeah, he can get there naked. He can get there without any of his pass catches being great. But once again, we're just trying to limit the number of things we need to get right in our lineup. So even if I'm playing Anthony Richardson, I'm single stacking him somewhere with either Pittman or Downs, most likely my favorite stacking partners with him. But I do think that he's very viable, and he's at least not like the most expensive quarterback out there. So I think Anthony Richardson certainly viable. And Justin Fields is a guy who I thought I was going to come in here and everybody was going to throw up and yell at me and tell me, shut up, Neil. But then all over Twitter, I'm seeing everybody talking about how they're going to Justin Fields. So I'm like, man, he might not be as I thought he was going to be super contrarian after another dud last week. It seems like a lot of people are on him. I'm going to be tracking the ownership because if it ends up being pretty low, yeah, I'm going to go back and make that same mistake again with Justin Fields.
And then one other thing that I want to mention about Justin Fields before we move on, because we're sponsored by DraftKings Rainmakers. Justin Fields, Neil, is now one of the cheapest quarterbacks on the secondary market of all starting quarterbacks. People have totally given up on him in Rainmakers. So if you guys play Rainmakers, if you don't, claim the free starters pack below. I think Justin Fields is the best quarterback that you could get right now because he is so cheap right now. And, who knows if he's going to bounce back or not. At the very least, though, we know he has fantasy upside. We saw it all the time this year. And the idea that you could buy some of his cards for just a few dollars, I think is worth it if you guys are playing in some of the Rainmakers contests. But let's move on to the running backs. But first, the super chat from Ace of Spade wants to know my favorite options for DK tiers. So I got tiers lineups built out here. And in tier 1, where our options are the high-end quarterbacks, I like Josh Allen the most. He's our highest projected quarterback this weekend. So tier 1, I like Josh Allen. We've got a lot of studs in tier 2. We've got Christian McCaffrey, we've got Tyreek Hill, we've got Justin Jefferson, but I actually like Keenan Allen more than all of them. even in a scenario, Neil, where we don't worry about the salary because it's just based on tiers, I still like Keenan Allen above the rest. I think it's a really good spot for him this weekend. His target share is insane so far this year, and there's no Mike Williams in the picture. So I love Keenan Allen in tier 2. Tier 3 for me, Stephon Diggs correlates nicely, stacking partner with Josh Allen that we had in tier 1. Tier 4, I like CeeDee Lamb the most, but I have CeeDee Lamb, Josh Jacobs, and Chris Olave very close between those 3 in tier 4. CeeDee Lamb edging it out, though. Tier 5, I actually like Justin Fields the most. And one thing that's great about Justin Fields as well in tiers is you don't have to be pressured to stack him with anybody, especially the way tiers works. True. You could play a naked Justin Fields, and I feel better about his rushing upside this week than earlier in the year. We've seen him in interviews talk about he needs to play more free. He just needs to go out and do his thing, play the way that he plays. He had a season high in rushing attempts last week. It was the first time this year that he got to north of 10 rushing attempts. So give me Justin Fields in tier 5. Tier 6, I have Deebo Samuel right now. But with that said, a little bit of a caveat that he is questionable to play. We don't know if he's going to be out there. If he does play, it's him in tier 6. If not, Zach Moss is another option there. And until we see Jonathan Taylor back, which, by the way, I don't know how you feel about the Jonathan Taylor situation, but my assumption is that he is going to be back with the Colts when he's off the injured list. And
yeah, it's hard to say what's going to happen there, but I feel like the latest rumors have sort of indicated that might be the case. Like I wouldn't have assumed that at all, but I feel like the latest is pushing it more in that direction.
And part of that makes me think that we're going to keep seeing the massive workload for Zach Moss because they know that it's going to be cut back in coming weeks. If it was a scenario where they did, to me, them cutting Deion Jackson and then Evan Hull being out for the season, and then they still don't go out and get another running back with the guys like Leonard Fournette that are available on free agency that you wouldn't have to pay all that much to get, it does indicate to me that Jonathan Taylor is going to be back when he's off the injured list. And that makes me think, at least for now, Zach Moss is going to keep getting run into the ground. So if Deebo isn't good to go, Zach Moss in tier 6. Tier 7, I like Joe Mixon the most. And then tier 8, Jacoby Myers, who's just gotten a ton of targets so far in that Raiders offense when he's been healthy. Running back time now, Neil. And this is going to also just be kind of the same with what I was talking about at quarterback. I want to pay up for wide receiver, so I'm not getting to very much of the pay up running backs, Neil. Like I have 12% exposure to Christian McCaffrey on DraftKings in my lineups right now. On FanDuel, I have 22% of McCaffrey, so a little bit more of him over there, about even with the field. Although still over on DraftKings, we've got Christian McCaffrey projected for 22% ownership, having been 12% allowed. So on the whole, I'm underweight to the field on McCaffrey. I find him very difficult to pay up for at his price point, considering the wideouts I want to get to. What do you think you're going to be doing with a chalky McCaffrey in a very good matchup?
Yeah, I imagine I'm going to be underweight to the field on McCaffrey. And it's worth noting, like, McCaffrey is really like a tier by himself. He's 9,200. The second most expensive running back is Tony Pollard at 7,800. And then the third most, Josh Jacobs at 7,100. So McCaffrey, so hard to get to. Like, you're expecting so much from him at 9,200. 22% projected ownership. Like, if he was going to be contrarian because of the price tag, then I would be in on McCaffrey. But because he's getting so much ownership, I think that I'm going to be underweight to the field. I also should note, I think that he's totally viable to stack with Brock Purdy. So that is one way to play McCaffrey and still play, kind of a cheaper lineup, is you can use McCaffrey as a stacking partner with Brock Purdy. He's pretty involved in the passing game. So in a lot of my McCaffrey lineups, I'll just be pairing him with Brock Purdy, but overall, I'm going to be underweight to the field just because that price tag is prohibitively expensive, at least as of right now. We might get more value options that open up between now and tomorrow. I don't think that we're really expecting any, but if some open up, maybe we'll play more McCaffrey. But as of now, I would expect to be underweight to the field.
Are there any other pay-up running backs that are standing out to you in any kind of meaningful way? We've got Tony Pollard on the slate projected for 16% ownership. I'm underweight to him. And then the other pay-up options, Josh Jacobs, he's off to a rough start. I really prefer the Raiders passing game to Josh Jacobs, so I'm underweight to him. Derrick Henry remains expensive. It's funny, remember last year, we had that week where we went really heavy on Derrick Henry when everybody was off of him, and then he kind of blew up at low ownership. This year, people are still getting to Derrick Henry. Like, there aren't these slates where he's 2-3% owned. Not that he's super popular this week, but still, he's 6% owned, and it's not just that he's not performing from a fantasy standpoint this year, Derrick Henry. He's losing out on snaps and touches to Spears. So I'm underweight to every single one of the pay up running backs this weekend. Every single one of them.
I think that's an important point, that Derrick Henry doesn't have that same workload that he used to have. Like you could count on like year in, year out. There was always at least a couple games where Derrick Henry would be unowned because of the matchup, and then he'd put up 3 touchdowns and just like break the entire slate. There's no guarantee that that's happening this year because he doesn't have the same workload that he had in past years. So kind of hard to get there. He is coming in at 6% ownership in a matchup that so far this year has looked pretty good against the Bengals. The Bengals, let me pull it up here. Let me find it. Bengals are 28th against the rush, like slight run funnel defense, but the Titans only have a 19.25 implied team total as well. Derrick Henry is one that like I'm contemplating. I might get over the field at 6%. I really like Josh Jacobs, but I don't know that I'm necessarily going to get above the field at 14%. Like I kind of hoped that Josh Jacobs would be contrarian here because he's been such a bust so far in the year and he has a great matchup. So I want to go there with Josh Jacobs. I think I could see myself like of the expensive guys, Josh Jacobs is the one that I'm the most likely to be above weight to the field on at 14%. I could see myself getting above that on Josh Jacobs, but probably not going too overboard with any of these guys for the reasons that you mentioned, that it's just you got to make concessions somewhere. We're going to want to pay up at wide receiver most likely, and these guys are getting ownership, so it's not like you're getting contrarian by paying up at running back. But yeah, I'd say of the high end running backs that are 7,000 or more, I'm most likely to get above weight to the field on Josh Jacobs, followed by Derrick Henry, followed by McCaffrey. I don't see myself getting overweight to the field on Tony Pollard against New England.
It's funny. I'm looking through my lineups right now. There's not a single running back priced over 6K that I'm overweight to the field to. Not a single one. There's not even a single running back north of 6K outside of Christian McCaffrey that I have double-digit exposure to. And like I said, that's with 12% of McCaffrey, which is about half the field anyway. Then I get to the 6K range. I do have some exposure to Kyren Williams, although with that being said, I am underweight to the field on Kyren Williams. The first running back, or I should say the most expensive running back I'm overweight to, is Zach Moss, for a lot of the reasons that I just mentioned before. He's projected for 11% ownership, so I do get overweight to the field on Zach Moss. I have ownership to him in the teens. Is there anything to you, whether it be Zach Moss, Kyren Williams, or any of these guys priced around 6K and above, that you're getting to, or that you think you're going to get to in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'm going to get to any above weight to the field. Like I think the field is kind of right on with a lot of these guys. Zach Moss, 11% ownership seems about right with the touches that he's getting. Similar for Kyren Williams. I think I'm going to be underweight to the field on Kyren. I feel pretty confident in that. Alvin Kamara is somebody that I could see myself getting above weight to the field on. Tampa's been a little bit worse against the run so far this year. We don't know exactly what kind of workload we can expect from Kamara, and he's coming in at about 8% ownership at 6,100. So I think it's a spot where Kamara could blow up. I'm not super confident it's going to happen, but I'd say that Kamara probably in that range, the one that I'm the most likely to get above weight to the field on.
Yeah, for me, once I start to get overweight to running backs, it's going to be ones who are a little bit cheaper. And the one that it starts with, and another one that comes with an injury asterisk, but Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders is $5,800. Good matchup against the Minnesota Vikings, and so much volume going to Miles Sanders so far this year. He was targeted 9 times last week, Neil, and now through 3 games, Miles Sanders has been targeted 20 times. He is averaging about 7 targets per game. He has not been efficient running the football or catching the football, but if you're going to give this guy 7 targets, you're going to give him the goal line work, and then he's going to see, what does he have, 40 rushing attempts through 3 games. So it's like, if he's going to be getting 7 targets, 14 rush attempts, goal line work, it's just enough volume and a good matchup to where his odds of succeeding are fairly high. So at $5,800, I think he's a little bit underpriced, assuming he's good to go. We had him pop up on the injury report with a groin injury. He's questionable to play. So I'm going to need him to be cleared, obviously, and for us to find out that like he's totally good to go, no restrictions in his workload. Assuming that is the case, he's going to be somebody I like getting to. If Miles Sanders is out, by the way, Chuba Hubbard, I'm going to be getting to a ton of, because you have to assume that he would just get a massive amount of workload. But Miles Sanders, and then the Chuba Hubbard situation in the event that Sanders could not play. What do you make of the duo in the Panthers backfield? Because do you like them as much as I do?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. No notes. Like that is exactly right. If Miles Sanders is good to go, I'm playing a lot of Miles Sanders against this Vikings defense. If he's not good to go, Chuba Hubbard becomes probably the best play on the entire slate. So yeah, I'm 100% with you. Love both of those plays against my Vikings, sadly.
Any other mid-range running backs that look like priorities to you?
It's hard to say priorities. I guess Javonte Williams, somebody I wanted to name, but he's getting 14% ownership. Like, you can't ask for a much better matchup than this matchup with the Bears. So I have some interest in Javonte Williams. What are you doing with Najee Harris? I'm so uninspired by Najee Harris, but he's got one of the best matchups you can hope for against the Texans, just a total run funnel defense coming in at 3% ownership. He's 5,500. I think this could be a spot where, a dead cat bounce kind of spot for Najee Harris against Houston. I think that I'm going to have some interest there. You playing any Najee Harris?
Najee Harris, he is in 1.3% of my top 150 lineups on DraftKings, and on FanDuel, let's see, Najee Harris is in 2.7% of my lineup. So it not really is the answer.
Okay. I think that I will get to some of Najee Harris. You could also, if you just want to play the player you'd rather play, you could also go to a 5,000 Jaylen Warren, I think is viable here. You tweeted about Josh Kelly, and I'm with you there also. Joshua Kelly, I'm going back to let him hurt me again. 9% projected ownership, 13% chance to be an optimal in the tools. He hasn't proven to be very good as the starting running back this year, but he was good in the one game that he played along with Austin Eckler. So I think that, and we saw in the preseason, he busted off like a 60, 70-yard touchdown run as well. So he does have at least the spike potential, and he's got a great matchup against the Raiders. He's 5,300. He's going to be starting. So yeah, I'm going to play some Josh Kelly again. It's been tough because I think the Chargers have been kind of like trying to scheme around him now. Like, they've been just like, all right, we're just going to throw the ball instead of going to the running back. But I think that he makes some sense. He's also great leverage against a chalky Keenan Allen. So lot to like about Joshua Kelly. He's somebody that I'm going to have. And I know you already tweeted about. Are you going to be playing him like a significant amount?
About double the field right now. I have him in 16% of lineups. There's like this core group of guys that are like on the cheapish to mid-range end of running backs that I really do like getting to. Miles Sanders being one, Javonte Williams is another. Talk about Zach Moss, Joshua Kelly, and then Rachaad White being the other one. And Rachaad White, I view very, very similarly to Miles Sanders. Just as here's a running back who's on the field a ton. He's involved in the pass game. He's involved in the run game. He's going to be getting goal line attempts. So that's really my core group of running backs. And as for Josh Kelly, it's funny, right? Because he's been so shitty the last couple of weeks, like, not going to deny. He was great in week one, but like, that's a distant memory at this point. And he's got an easier matchup by a mile, an easier matchup this week than what we've seen from him in some of these other spots. The Minnesota matchup was pretty decent. The Tennessee matchup was not, though. That's a really tough matchup that he failed in. And we have basically the same projection on this week that we've had the last couple of weeks, which is 13 off the top of my head. It's like 13 and a half fantasy points. Let's see. It is 13.43. If I'm not mistaken, 2 weeks ago, his projection was 13.6 and everybody was playing him. This week, because he sucked the last couple of weeks, the field is off him at this point. And I like getting overweight to the field on Joshua Kelly. I have him in 16% of my lineups. I'm going to be overweight to the fields on him, just as I have been the last couple of weeks. And he has good opportunity. I can't guarantee he's going to play well. I've already seen him shit the bed 2 weeks in a row.
Right.
But I do think there's still opportunity for him. He's going to start a running back. And it's easy to forget that he has had one really good game this year. Week one, which you mentioned, Neil. He rushed for 91 yards against the Dolphins. And it's not like that was a game where it's just like, oh, but Eckler was there that game. To an extent, Eckler was there at the beginning of the game, but Eckler got hurt and barely played in the second half.
Right. And yeah, as you said, he did well. He's really only done poorly in one good matchup. That was against Tennessee, against the Vikings. Yeah, it was a good matchup for him against that Vikings run defense. Against Tennessee, like, that was kind of to be expected. Like, they were just such a pass funnel defense. So yeah, I think makes a lot of sense to go back there. Couple other names to throw out there. I've seen a lot of people in chat talking about DeAndre Swift. He doesn't like stand out in the tools, but like, if you tell me DeAndre Swift scores a couple more touchdowns with this Philadelphia O-line, not going to shock me. He is getting so much of the workload at this point, and he's only 5,700. Like, they've been saying, Sirianni has been saying that they're going to be a hot hand approach. I think DeAndre Swift is just the better running back, so he's going to be the hot hand like basically all year. So yeah, DeAndre Swift at 5,700 makes a lot of sense. He doesn't stand out because we're projecting for 12% ownership, 12% chance of being in the optimal lineup. So I think DeAndre Swift, yeah, he looks good. I don't know what to do with A-Chain at this point. Like, this is such a, you and I got a question on Twitter. Somebody tweeted at you and me and asked, who would you rather play in season long, Jahmyr Gibbs or Devon Achane? And I said Jahmyr Gibbs, and that's not looking great because Jahmyr Gibbs didn't do very well. It's not very likely for Jahmyr Gibbs to be the guy who outscores. I mean, he's not going to clearly outscore Devon Achane by that much. Whereas Achane, like, he could just go off once again. I'm not really expecting much from Achane, but I will say, like, I don't know. We've only seen one game where he got any kind of volume and he went completely off. I kind of think that was a little bit fluky, a little bit related to that Broncos run defense, and people are maybe overreacting a little bit to that game. But I mean, I guess maybe not, because we're only projecting for about 3% ownership. I don't know. What are you doing with Devon Achane?
It's hard for me to get to either of these guys because for a time, what I assume is going to be a timeshare, they're both expensive. Like, how often have we seen a running back combination be 6,500, 5,700? The only time I can remember this in recent memory, unless I'm forgetting something, is a couple of years ago when we had the Alvin Kamara, Mark Ingram backfield, where both of them would be, pretty expensive like this. And, even then, it's not like we were dying to play Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram. If one of them was banged up, you'd play the other one. And now we have this Mostert and Achane situation, or Achane, as he put out on, was it on Twitter? He said that, so apparently the entire time he played in college, all through the preseason, his name was always wrong. He just never told anybody until last week. Because I guess now he's like, oh, people are going to be talking about me because I had a really big game. So Achane, Mostert, I don't have exposure to either of them right now, mostly because it's a timeshare and they both have ownership. It's not a ton, but still 3.5% ownership to Achane, 6% ownership to Mostert. Realistically, they're not going to score 70 points again. So what are we looking at? Like 10-ish touches for each of them? Something like that?
Right. Probably. Yeah, it's tough to get there. No, it's a little bit tough. And what about the other side? So I think that we kind of skipped over, and now I'm rethinking it. James Cook, like I skipped over it. We do have some positive leverage there. 9% projected ownership, 11% chance of being optimal. He obviously has the better matchup against that Miami defense. Maybe like that could be kind of an interesting leverage play. The Dolphins 26th against the run. Are you getting to, maybe you said already, but are you getting to any James Cook?
On FanDuel, he is my fourth most roster running back. I get to a bunch from over on FanDuel. Some of them on DraftKings, not as much on FanDuel. FanDuel is going to be like a core play for me. So James Cook, like you mentioned, pretty good matchup against the Dolphins. Should be an up-pace game. He's one of the only pieces of that game that's in like a guaranteed workhorse type situation that isn't all that expensive.
Yeah.
So James Cook, $6,800 on FanDuel is one of my favorite running back plays on the slate.
Okay. Yeah, and he's I think viable on DraftKings also, but maybe a better on FanDuel kind of play. All right, I think we've named all of the running backs that I have significant interest in, unless I don't think I'm missing anybody. Anybody else that you want to talk about?
No, we've got a super chat here from Avi Schreier, and it's funny because we just talked about it, but he asks, what running backs do we like in the 6 to 6.5K range on FanDuel? And to me, it's Josh Kelly. I guess I have like some interest in Alvin Kamara, but he's 15% owned on FanDuel, which I think is about appropriate. So I'm close to even with the field on Kamara. And then if you want to consider like Miles Sanders at 6,600, I know he has 6,000 to 6,500, but I have exposure to Miles Sanders, who's $6,600, so $100 more expensive. And then Javonte Williams at $5,800, so $200 under that. So right now, my two most exposed running backs on FanDuel are Sanders and Javonte Williams, but they're like just outside the range that he gave me in terms of the pricing. But if I'm sticking strictly to that price range, I do unfortunately like Joshua Kelly the most.
I haven't looked at the pricing on FanDuel, but yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, Kelly is 6K on FanDuel, which is relatively a lot cheaper than what he is over on DraftKings. So Kelly, I'll be playing him on FanDuel. He's projected for 17% ownership. He's also expected to be a little bit more popular on FanDuel. But yeah, Avi, that's the best way that I could answer that question for you is if you had to play one of those guys from that price range, Joshua Kelly, if we could expand it a little bit, Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders also make a good amount of sense. Anything else you like from the running back position that we have not talked about?
No, I think we've largely talked about it. I'd throw just into that conversation in response. Najee is another guy that I might have some interest in, but he's getting about as much ownership, 6% ownership, 6% chance to be an optimal. So I'd throw that into that conversation, but nobody else that I really feel the need to talk about here.
All right. Wide receiver time it is then. And by the way, guys, if you want to sign up for any of the data that we have over at stochastic.com, sign up using the link below because everything is included in our NFL data package. Now, our Sims tool, our contest generator, player projections, ownership projections, the boom bust tool, and the stacks tool that Neil and I reference a good amount on this show. All of that stuff is included in our NFL package. You sign up and get access to all of that using the link that we have below. Time for wide receivers now, Neil, and this is where I'm spending my salary. My two most rostered wide receivers on the entire slate are Keenan Allen and Davante Adams. I know they're both popular, but I think it's very, very warranted on this slate. Davante Adams is going to be contingent on Jimmy G playing. I'm not going to have very much interest in him if Brian Hoyer is the quarterback. I get why the field is getting to Keenan Allen. I get why the field is getting to Davante Adams. And frankly, I think they're both a little bit underpriced. $7,900 for Keenan Allen, $8,000 for Davante Adams. These guys project, I was going to say similarly to Justin Jefferson and Tyreek Hill, but we actually have them projected above those guys, but at a considerably cheaper price tag. Davante Adams and Keenan Allen are respectively, 1,700 and 1,300 less than Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs. So that's why I'm prioritizing my Keenan Allen, Davante Adams, paying up at wide receiver. Do you agree with that, Neil? Or do you like Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, any other wide receiver more than guys like Keenan Allen and Davante Adams?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough with Jamar Chase because Jamar Chase stands out to me. Like, if he's going to be significantly, like, we've got him at about half the ownership where we have Keenan Allen, and he's cheaper than Keenan Allen, and he's in a great matchup with Tennessee. But like, Joe Burrow has looked so hobbled that it's kind of hard to trust. I still think Jamar Chase is somebody that I'm going to want to take some shots on. Hope that Joe Burrow maybe has recovered a little bit by Sunday. So I would throw Jamar Chase into that conversation only because he is coming in at, as I said, about, I shouldn't say only because, but he's coming in about half the ownership of those guys, and he's in a great spot. He hasn't really done it yet. The last game he was fine. So he would be in that conversation for me. Obviously, I mean, I think all of these guys, Jamar Chase up to Justin Jefferson, clearly all are very much in play. But I think that you probably have it right in terms of the guys that you'd rather get to just because of the price tags, like Davante Adams being 8,000, Keenan Allen being 7,900, and just the volume that they get in terms of looks is just so high. And they both have, obviously, they're facing each other. It's a great game environment there as well. So yeah, I really like both of those guys. I also, similarly, that Miami Buffalo game environment makes a lot of sense. But as you said, it gets like pretty pricey pretty quickly trying to stack that game in any kind of meaningful way, with Tyreek Hill being 9,200, Stephon Diggs 8,100. Both obviously look great in a matchup where they could completely go off, but we have a little bit of negative leverage on each of them. And then my guy, Justin Jefferson, coming in at just 6% ownership against this Carolina defense. Yeah, hard not to have some interest there. We have a little bit of positive leverage there, 8% chance of being optimal for J-Jets. I'll probably throw some out there. He feels like he's the safest wide receiver out there right now in general in terms of putting up fantasy points, but maybe not the safest in terms of paying off this price tag because he is so much more expensive than other receivers who project pretty similarly to him. So I'll play some of him because of the 6% ownership, but I think you're spot on with Adams and Allen from a like fantasy points per dollar kind of perspective, just stand out above the rest as being looking really great here. And then, of course, what you can throw Waddle into those Miami Buffalo stacks as well.
And we've got a question here from Abby Schreier. Super Chat wants to know Breece Hall, Najee Harris, or Pierce on FanDuel. So Breece Hall is not on the main slate. Is it like the Sunday to Monday slate you're playing then, I guess? I would assume so. Either way, if we go and look at all of the running backs, if you're including Breece Hall, he has to have the most upside of all those guys. Like, who knows what his workload is going to be? But at a certain point, the Jets have alluded to, they're going to give him more and more work as the season goes on. He looked great in week 1.
Yeah.
He's looked less good since then. But I'm going to say Breece Hall above those other two guys. And then as far as Najee Harris and Dameon Pierce, let's see. I feel like I'm not really getting to either of them.
It'd be Harris for me, just for that matchup against the Texans. I'd rather have Harris against the Texans than Pierce against the Steelers.
Yeah, I have. So of my top 150 lineups on FanDuel, mentioned before, I have 2.7% of Najee Harris, but I have 0% of Dameon Pierce. So by default, I'm going to go to Najee Harris if it's just one of those two. Overall, if it's the all day slate, Breece Hall over the other two though. If not, then I'm going to say Najee Harris with minimal confidence as the answer to that one. As far as the wide receivers go that are not the expensive options, if we're going into like the mid-range, Nakua stands out to me just because of the workload we've seen from him so far this year. I am prioritizing spending up at wide receiver, but in the mid-range, I guess we'll include him in the likes of it. There are two wide receivers in the, or I should say, let's just go the 6K range, actually. In this kind of range, the one I like the most, it's by far Nakua.
Yeah, Nakua looks really good. The volume has been just so massive for Nakua. Nice matchup going up against the Colts as well. So I think I'm with you as Nakua being probably the best in this range. Michael Pittman, the volume has been really strong for Michael Pittman so far this year. As I mentioned, I have some interest in doing some Anthony Richardson stacks. I think Anthony Richardson and Michael Pittman stacks certainly viable. I like that. Man, Godwin has been such a disappointment so far this year. Like Mike Evans just kind of seems to be taking over there in Tampa, makes it hard to really want to go much to Godwin. I mean, you talked about Brock Purdy. It sounds like, are you more interested in Debo or Ayuk if Debo is healthy?
If Debo is healthy, it's Debo. If Debo is out, like I'm going to be getting to a good amount of Ayuk and George Kittle.
Yeah, I think that makes it makes it so much easier with those San Francisco guys when one of them is out. And it happens pretty frequently that you're missing one of those guys. The other guys then look so much better. It's just so hard to guess when there are so many mouths to feed there in San Francisco. So obviously if Debo is out, then it's going to be an easy decision there.
Yeah, so I'm getting to a lot more Nakua than Debo, but still I'm a little bit overweight to field on Debo, who's only projected for 7% ownership. But the guys I really, really get to the most of is like the outside of the expensive guys is this lower mid-range where there is George Pickens, who I just don't think is priced appropriately for the absence of Deontay Johnson. So $5,400 George Pickens, who's gotten a bunch of targets this year. Pickett's just been really inefficient this year. But if you get one of these games, and it's a good matchup too, by the way, because they're playing against the Texans this weekend. Yeah, is Pickens at $5,400. He has gotten as many as 10 targets in the game so far this year. He's gotten at least 6 in every game so far. He's only caught 13 of his 23 targets, which kind of speaks to the accuracy of Kenny Pickett. But on that kind of volume, in a good matchup, very favorable. Everybody on this team, we talked about before with Kenny Pickett, really cheap. So you can stack any Pickett with any of Pat Freiermuth, with George Pickens, with Calvin Austin, and it's just very, very cost effective. So I really like those Steelers stacks, and picking somebody I like in the mid-range. The other one here as well for some similar reasons, Jacoby Myers. We've only seen him active in 2 games so far this year for the Raiders, 12 targets and 10 targets in those games, 9 catches for 81 yards and 2 touchdowns, 7 catches for 85 yards. He's another guy just based on his workload, assuming Jimmy G plays, too cheap. Jimmy G is really only throwing the ball to Adams and Jacoby Myers. They have something like 75% of the team's targets.
Yeah, I mean, Jacoby Myers, it is really contingent, I think, on Jimmy Garoppolo for me. Like, I don't think I'm going to go there if Jimmy G is out, as you said, but with Jimmy G in there, certainly going to have some interest there. I sort of mentioned Jalen Waddle, but I should just like point out, like, yeah, he's in that bucket, except getting 1% ownership. So maybe that's another of those top end guys that I should throw out there is like, he's getting really low ownership for a wide receiver 2 who has clear wide receiver 1 upside. But I thought of throwing that back out there because Gabe Davis coming in at 0.7% ownership in a game where there is huge potential for fireworks and he's only 5,900. Hard for me to not have a lot of interest in Gabe Davis. Like, I know he can have huge dud weeks, but we know that Gabe Davis can also have just some massive ceilings weeks as well. And looking at his route participation, he's running routes on 79% of plays so far this year for the Bills. He's just getting as many routes as just about anybody on the Bills here. Let's see. We got Diggs is up at 90%, Davis at 79%. He is second on the team in terms of route participation. The target share hasn't really been there for Gabe Davis so far this year, but he always has that, just like 1 or 2 plays can absolutely break a slate wide open. So hard for me to not have some interest in Gabe Davis in a game where we're expecting a lot of scoring, a lot of people playing other parts of that matchup, and somehow we have Davis coming in sub 1%. He's another player that really stands out to me as somebody that I'm going to want to play in this matchup. But I think, yeah, like you know, the guys that are like the most the most likely to get there in Jacoby Myers and George Pickens, and neither of them looks like they're. I mean, Pickens looks pretty underowned. Myers we have slightly overowned, but still looks like a fairly safe bet there. Another name that I would throw out there, Nico Collins. I feel like with kind of a dud last week, like I feel like that maybe people are going to be off him a little bit more than they should be. Coming in at 4% projected ownership, 5% chance being optimal in our sims. I kind of like Nico Collins. This is a guy who's talented and I still think is the wide receiver one there. Maybe Tank Dell has surpassed him, but the ownership much lower on Nico Collins than Tank Dell. And I still view Nico Collins as kind of the wide receiver one at this point. So there's one more name that I'd throw out there.
Yeah, I mean, Nico Collins, massive volume from in week 1 and week 2. And I think he makes sense, especially as a run back in some of those Steelers stacks I'm getting to. So I don't have an issue with that. There is a cheap leverage play that I like a good amount for this slate, Neil. And I want to know what you think about it because we'll finish up by here talking about the punt wide receivers. I'm getting to some exposure of Calvin Austin, but one I've really, really liked, Quentin Johnston. We know Mike Williams is out for the Chargers. He is going to be out for the season, torn ACL. It's the main reason, well, amongst also Keenan Allen just crushing so far this year, that we're seeing Keenan Allen get so many targets. Somebody has to slot and be the number 2 wide receiver. The field seems to think it's going to be Palmer because we have Palmer projected for 12% ownership, which, you know, it's not a crazy amount, but Palmer's projected for 12% ownership. Johnston's projected for 5% ownership. We have similar projections on the 2 wide receivers. Johnson's also a little bit cheaper. This is somebody who they used a first round pick on. I think he's very talented. He hasn't gotten the chance to play very much this year. I think that really could change with Mike Williams out. I don't know that for sure, but the field is playing Palmer about 3x the amount that they're playing Johnson. Johnson also being cheaper. I think it's a really easy pivot to make, is getting a little bit more exposure to Johnston than to Palmer, because I don't think there's any guarantees that either of these guys are going to be the number 2 wide receiver. So I just prefer to do the opposite of what the field is doing.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think Johnston also the receiver who is the most similar to Mike Williams on the Chargers. So like it would make a lot of sense for them to at least try it out. Just like throw him in there, put him in that Mike Williams role, see if he can do it. And if the field's not going to play him as though they're going to do that, then yeah, I'm with you. Just like go for the guy who's getting low ownership, and it would make some sense for them to try it out. So I like that call. Quentin Johnston also looks really good in our boom bust tool. We have him as our top leverage play on the entire slate at 5% ownership with a 15% chance of being optimal. Lot to love there about Quentin Johnston. I'm with you there.
Yeah, so Johnson, that's going to be somebody who I definitely get to as a leverage play, low own play. That's somebody who at a 5% ownership on DraftKings, somebody I'm going to be pretty well overweight to the field too. Anything else you like on the cheap end of wideout, Neil?
I don't think there was anything else that really stood out to me on the cheap end.
All right. So let's go ahead and talk about the tight ends then. Although first, also want to shout out to you guys that if you're looking for bets this weekend, playing DFS, but maybe want another way to make some money, check out Odd Chopper. We've had a lot of bets getting populated for NFL. It's off to a good start to the year. So if you guys are looking for the easiest way to bet on football, sign up at Odd Chopper. We currently have a 70% off deal when you sign up for the first time using the link below. So go check out Odd Chopper if you're looking to place any bets on NFL this weekend. And it's also going to do the line shopping for you. If you don't know where the best line is, you don't have to compare across every single book. The projection at Odd Chopper will tell you which book has the best line and also which lines are actually plus EV at different books. So check out Odd Chopper if you guys are looking to bet. Sign up using the link below for 70% off. Let's go ahead and talk about those tight ends now, Neil. And a slate here, which not unfamiliar for us to talk about, is a super, super shitty at tight end. Super shitty. There are not great tight ends to look at. The one I get the most of, I only have one tight end that I have double-digit exposure to right now. Only one, and it's Pat Freiermuth. And a lot of it has to do with that he's basically super cheap. I'm getting exposure to Pickett. He just kind of makes sense in that sense when he's only $3,400 over on DraftKings. And then on FanDuel, Freiermuth is a little bit more expensive at $5,500, but still super cheap. So he's my most exposed tight end. Does that make sense to you, Neil? Is there somebody else you think should be more rostered than him?
Yeah, no, I think that makes some sense. He is, as you said, 3,400 for Pat Freiermuth, one of the better tight ends on the slate. Makes a lot of sense to me. We have him coming in with a 13% chance of being optimal, top of the board in terms of optimal odds. So yeah, 3,400 Pat Freiermuth makes plenty of sense to me.
Yeah, and by the way, Marcos in the chat is saying we have Kittle and Mark Andrews. Lamar Jackson's not played all that well this year. Mark Andrews has also been banged up. Like, I get it, but at the same time, too, the team total is super, super low for the Ravens. We're not projecting them all that well against the Browns. The total in that game is 39 points. It's the
Yeah.
lowest total on the entire slate. The Ravens are also underdogs in the game. So their team total is 18 points this weekend. It's so, so low that nothing like Lamar Jackson doesn't project that well for us. Mark Andrews doesn't project all that well. So I consider him to be a little bit overpriced, all that information being considered. Now, George Kittle, if Debo is out, would immediately become somebody who's a priority play for me. I have some exposure to him right now, but like I said, the only tight end I have double-digit exposure to as of Saturday afternoon is Pat Freiermuth. George Kittle would absolutely be in that mix if Debo Samuel doesn't play. We just don't have that information right now.
Yep, exactly right. He would become like a priority, I think, at tight end if Debo is out. Like that San Francisco offense, it just takes one player being out of the stars, and suddenly you become much more condensed to the other stars, and they all look a lot better.
Yeah. So I mean, there's nothing else I'm really getting to a ton of at tight end. Like I get to some of Chigakonkwo, but he's 7%. I have 7%. Everything else is just quarterbacks that are it's just tight ends who are paired with quarterbacks or run backs and lineups. Only 10% more exposure to one tight end on the entire slate for me, and Pat Freiermuth, at least as far as DraftKings goes. FanDuel, I also have Tyler Higbee in that mix, but Higbee himself is questionable play right now, so I don't know if he's going to be suiting up. I think he looks pretty decent on FanDuel, but I don't really have any strong leans at tight end. Is there anything else you see where like that's a really good tight end play that the field is missing out on?
I do still like those Bills tight ends. I think you can go back to either or of Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. I think that they're so cheap, and in a game that should just have absolute fireworks. Nice matchup with Miami. I think there's a lot to like about both of the Buffalo guys. My preference would be Kincaid, I think, at 3,200 over Knox at 3,100, but both very much in play there. I actually, one more, just want to go back to, you asked me for cheap wide receivers, and I said that I didn't have any more, and then I looked a little bit closer and I thought, oh yeah, all of the Carolina guys are somewhat in play for me. And I thought about that in part because I think Hayden Hurst kind of falls in that bucket too. So we got Hayden Hurst at 3,300 coming in at 1% ownership, 3% chance of being optimal. The Vikings defense is just so bad that I think you can basically attack it from any angle you want to. But then along with him, I mean, Adam Thielen, I'm going to quit DFS if Adam Thielen puts up 20 plus fantasy points once again. He's just absolutely murdering me. So I'm going to make the bet on, I think, Jonathan Mingo, DJ Chark from the wide receivers on the Panthers. And then, of course, Hayden Hurst, as I said, bringing it back to the tight ends, I think is very much in play here at 3,300. He's very involved in that passing game and getting like zero ownership. So those are some of my favorites. I'd say Hayden Hurst, the two Bills guys. Kittle is going to be in play either way, but especially if Debo is out. Freiermuth, as you mentioned. You can always go back to my guy, TJ Hawkinson. You can find really nice positive leverage on Hawkinson. Now, we've talked about all of the salary concessions we have to make. He might end up being kind of a salary concession, but I still think I'm going to be above weight to the 4% projected ownership we have on Hawkinson. The volume is just there. Maybe a redemption spot for Hawkinson after just that brutal last game for him. Low ownership. He's very involved in the passing game, so I'll go back there again. Goddard at 4,400. I don't know. It seems fine. I don't think I'm playing a lot of that Eagles offense outside of Swift, but maybe you could play a few shares there. Yeah, nobody else really standing out to me.
Yeah, it's a spray and pray for me at tight end, although if Debo doesn't play, George Kittle will become a fairly high priority for me on this slate. But I don't have an issue just mixing around tight end exposure, especially because like I'm so condensed at wide receiver that it's something that I do like getting to. Super chat here from Jamal Parker. And then after we answer this, we're going to close out the show. Neil and I will talk about if we're only playing one lineup in a large field tournament, what stack it is that we would be getting to. First, Jamal says, in the Sims contest generator, do you guys up players before running per the contest simulator? Do you up your projections at all? Okay, so before running it, no, because what the contest generator is doing is it's trying to make it's trying to build a set of lineups that mirrors what the field is going to do, which is what the purpose of that tool really is you want it to mirror the field. So when you simulate out the slate, it'll really highlight which players, lineup, stacks are being under-owned is what will happen. If you are just like bumping players up in the contest generator, you're basically saying that they're going to be higher owned than what's being projected. So it's going to skew your results a little bit. If you want to alter your exposures to individual players, what you want to do is do the ROI boost after you've already done the contest generator and run lineups through the Sims. Then you do ROI boost. You change individual players. You're like, hey, I don't like this guy quite as much. That's how you should make your alterations. I wouldn't do it before in the contest generator because it's going to skew the results.
Yeah, the only case that you can make for some players is if a player is not going to make it into your field and you feel adamantly that they should be somebody that you want to consider in your DFS lineups, then maybe you can consider doing just for like those, but only if they're not going to make it into the field of 10,000, which obviously you should be very careful in doing that kind of thing.
So stack time, Neil. If you're playing one lineup in a large field tournament, what stack you'd be most apt to get to in that lineup?
Yeah, I went really contrarian last week, and it did not work out for me at all with Justin Fields. So I think I'm going to go contrarian in a different way here. And I know you're wanting to pay down. I think I might end up just paying up a little bit and go to if we're going to get Tua at sub 4% owned, like he's just broken so many slates that I think Tua might be my just go Tua to, and I guess here's what I'll go contrarian. I'll go Tua to Waddle.
Okay, so for me. All right. I'll give out two because I want to go Jimmy G with the double stack of Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers. Adams and Myers are both popular, but Jimmy G isn't. He's only projected for 6% ownership. So I think that is one way to play those wide receivers and differentiate. But with that said, Jimmy G questionable. So if he is out, then it would be for me double stack Kenny Pickett to George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth. So a couple options there, depending how the injuries end up breaking. And then, one more super chat was about to close out, but then Stewie Griffin from Family Guy says, any interest in young skinnies with JJ?
So like going Bryce Young with one of the cheap receivers and then Justin Jefferson on the bringback. Yeah, that is interesting to me. I think that Bryce Young still very clearly early in his career here. He was the first overall pick. I think that better days are maybe going to be ahead, and if better days are ahead, it's probably going to start against the Vikings. So I'd like to get ahead of the field playing a cheap Bryce Young in this matchup. So yeah, I like that quite a bit. You can save money with Bryce Young going to Jonathan Mingo, for example, and then Justin Jefferson is I think it makes sense.
Hey, so for me, it's just Justin Jefferson's a little bit too expensive this week. I don't have a ton of exposure to him. If you're only playing one lineup, it's just not my favorite build. It's somebody who in Jefferson I have 7% exposure to right now. And then as far as Bryce Young goes, I only have a couple of Bryce Young lineups. It's a viable play. It's not going to be what the most of my lineups look like, but I understand why it is that you're getting there. Guys, thank you very much for watching. If you have not done yet, do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Shout out to DraftKings Rainmakers who are sponsoring the show. If you haven't done yet, claim that free starters pack clicking on the link below. Totally free. No reason to not take advantage of it. Guys, thank you very much. Have a great day. Have a great weekend as well. And we'll see you back here next week.